To some business now, and Ghana ended last year with a 4.6% growth below government's projected 6.9%. For this year, government in its budget has further revised downwards the growth rate to 3.9%, a rate several analysts have criticized as low, insisting businesses will not flourish, imports will go down, and the country will generally lose investments. But head of research at the Stanchart Bank Group, Razia Khan, is optimistic and explains Ghana's growth will not fall off the cliff given a strengthened fiscal stance.
Important developments still in the hydrocarbon sector. There is the completion of the gas infrastructure and what that might potentially mean for the power sector. I'm not convinced necessarily that credit growth in Ghana has shown any impact as a result of recent tightening efforts. The credit growth numbers still seem to be fairly robust. So it's not necessarily that clear-cut that growth in Ghana is going to fall off a cliff, so to speak. But I think we've got to carefully assess the growth that is possible. Even if we don't see a big impact in the near term, we've got to look at the longer term trade-offs that have been created. Essentially, if Ghana is to engage in fiscal excess now, given its debt situation, it will be trading off a lot of future potential, a lot of that future growth, a lot of that long-term growth for very short-term wins that ultimately don't account for very much. It's important to get the policy equation right. There's a lot to be said for the extent of revisions to the growth statistics, and this is something that is going to be looked at very carefully. But one thing we do need to take on board, growth is not just about what the government is doing. If the private sector could get a shot in the arm in terms of confidence because of what they see as the macroeconomic stabilization effort, that should help offset some of the drag impact of the fiscal consolidation. Investor confidence could go some way in supporting some elements of growth that otherwise the Ghanaian economy might not see because the government is forced to cut back on spending.
A Ghanaian economist based in South Africa has lauded Ghana's efforts at embracing public-private partnership as a development model which he says has potentials for expansion. Joel Bano, who is a senior associate and PPP advisor at Genesis Analytics Practice, says the country must establish workable structures to attract more investment for bigger projects. He was speaking at the Global Conference on Public-Private Partnership in Kumasi.
According to Mr. Bano, the perception that public-private partnership is an easy way to develop public infrastructure is deceptive, explaining that building institutional capacity on technical, managerial, and financial fronts is very key in achieving results. He says government must focus on establishing capacity to identify structure and procure projects.
PPPs are seen as an easy way for the public sector to procure infrastructure, and it's not always the case. You can't structure a PPP for a small-scale infrastructure project quite well, but most of them require some institutional capacity, both in terms of technical, managerial, and some financial capacity, and this is where the government must focus.
Meanwhile, Director at Synergy Global, Michael Kobler, is welcoming banks to come on board to galvanize other private sector partners to fund PPP projects.
Even though PPP has a long gestation, 15 years, 25 years, as banks in this country, they must be able to galvanize other financing institutions because they have a balance sheet and they have credibility. So if they partner with private sector sources, they can put funding requirements together to be able to meet this long-term